All right, guys, let's talk about the latest in the business world related to MMA promotions. So, as many of you have probably read or seen videos about this, the PFL and MVP promotions recently have merged to become one entity. So, I said to myself, well, let's look at what some of the MMA pundits or leaders are talking about regarding this merger. So right now, it looks like Dana White has been given his same generic answer, which is, what happens when none of these promotions make money? They all come together and decide that they're going to lose money together, apparently, right? He's pretty much says that his main competition in the space is the NBA, the NFL, and every other, I guess, major league in the US. So good for Dana White. So I was looking at some of the numbers, and the UFC's revenue in 2025 was 1.5 billion. Remember, they signed, I think it was the 7.7 billion-dollar deal with Paramount. One thing I actually read upon recently is a lot of that contract is heavy on the back end. So it's not like he's getting 1.1 million. Sorry, excuse me. He's not getting 1.1 billion every year early on. So again, that CBS deal or that Paramount deal is more money than Paramount even has. So I assume they are making contributions, probably have some sort of line of credit, right, with some banking institutions or financial institutions. And so again, Paramount is investing heavily into the UFC with hopes that they'll have a return on investment in order to pay and fulfill uh, the back end heavy part of this deal. Again, 1.5 billion in 2025 and in 2025 for PFL and MVP, it's very hard to calculate. These are privately held organizations. According to online searches, the rough estimate for both organizations is anywhere from 100 to 110 million in revenue per year, which means they bring potentially 200 million a year in revenue. Again, when you do that comparison, the UFC is still 7.5 times bigger if the 200 million a year in revenue for PFL and MVP is true. Uh, One thing that Dana said on this recent interview with the Mac Life was that MMA is an $8 billion a year industry. So you would think that they have a lot of case studies, market research that gives them that number. So, and again, this is another reason why the UFC is traveling a lot more abroad these days. Um, Obviously we know their main stops in Abu Dhabi, and I forget where they're at this weekend, but I know it's also an international card. So forgive me for that. Nonetheless, that was an interesting take from Dana outside of his normal nonsense when referring to other MMA promotions. Now, I started looking into the merger, and Ariel Helwani had interesting take, and he spoke not only obviously about the Jake Paul effect or impact, but he also spoke about this gentleman, which I know I've seen during a lot of the pressers, Nakisa Bidarian. So I was not aware until Ariel mentioned it that Nakisa actually served as the CFO of the UFC, and he actually joined the UFC back in 2011 as Chief Strategy Officer for Business Ventures. So he built a relationship with the Fertitta brothers, as you can see, based on Wikipedia, and shortly there joined them as the CFO. He was also part of the acquisition or closing the acquisition from Endeavor at the time, right? And apparently even stayed on as chief executive officer of Fertitta Capital. So again, Nakisa has a long-standing relationship with the Fertitta brothers, and I would think he has a good relationship with Dana White. But I was reading on this, and before continuing, again, I didn't find anything related to any sort of fallout with the UFC and Nikisa. But again, I find it very fascinating. I don't want to speculate, but it kind of comes across as Nikisa just was not a big fan of Dana. But again, I'll leave it there. Though he does say that, and I'll go back into this, but if you're reading this, Jake Paul and Badarian were introduced back in 2019. So one thing that I find fascinating about this is that these guys go back 7 years. This is not like MVP popped out of nowhere. A lot of us, again, remember the fights, especially during COVID, and some of the fights that were held by Jake Paul and a lot of these former fighters, Woodley, right, that he fought twice and I think knocked out in the second fight, uh, and so on and so forth. I forget the basketball player, Nate Robinson, that he knocked out as well, Ben Askren again. So this goes back to way even before then. So Badarian apparently did part ways, going back to the relationship with the UFC about 2019. So that same year that that they met, um, because of he was attacking McGregor and Dana White. Badarian considered them friends or considers them friends. So interesting. So I guess there is no bad blood between Nakisa and Dana White. But again, I was just speculating just because of just seems weird. But maybe he just decided, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. I feel like I have a vision for this sport, and I want my own promotion. So maybe that's where that comes from. So again, now this is where Triller at the time hired Badarian, it looks like, as an executive producer. And at that point, he reached out to Jake Paul. Uh, Again, strong pull with young audiences. So I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a background to that and how Badarian, who's a heavy part of this merger and will be, an executive, it seems, and on the board per Ariel Hawani. Jake Paul seems to be the face of the promotion in terms of the promoter itself. And I know that the PFL's CEO, whose name eludes me, will continue or remain CEO, John Martin Jr. Yep, I saw his um, interview on Ariel Hawani when he became CEO back in I think the summer of 2025. Yep, July 2025. So again, very interesting stuff happening there. And again, on that same note, I started looking at some of the information that we have, such as I remember earlier in the year, Scott, I always butcher his last name, Scott Coker. He is actually, and again, for those of you who are not aware, Scott Coker is the former founder of Strikeforce and former president of Bellator. And again, if for those of you that are not aware, back in 2023, the reason why this is relevant is the PFL and Bellator merged, and they since retired the Bellator brand, and now subsequently the PFL brand will be retired in favor of MVP Promotions, which I think makes all the logical sense given the fact that they've pulled the most views. And so Scott Coker, one of the things that's interesting about him is that as all this is happening with MVP Promotions and PFL, he is also putting together a new promotion, which he advertised on Ariel's show, I want to say in the last 2 to 3 months. And he has 60 million already in funding, according to that last interview, and he's bringing in some serious, executive power. As you can see, CEO Steve Bornstein from NFL Network. So again, there's a lot of movement happening in the MMA community. And then let's look at some of the numbers, right? When we look at the most recent numbers for PFL and MVP, or let's look at MVP because PFL's numbers were terrible compared to the UFC. So one of the things that you got to say about MVP and the Jake Paul effect, which I'll go into a little bit later, is that they did 108 million views on the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight and 17 million views on the Rousey Carano, which again, if I'm not mistaken, triple two recent significant UFC cards, which I'm talking about obviously the White House card and the most recent McGregor fight. If I believe they both respectively did 6 and 6.5 million. So again, one event. Now the difference is, as we know, that the UFC has continuous cards weekly. 45 or so weeks out of the year. Um, but that's also been one of the detriments with the UFC. There's been obviously not allegations. There's been criticism rather um, that their fights are being watered down. And truthfully, there's been a couple of cards this year that I've skipped, and more so not knowing anyone. And I know some people will say, well, why aren't you watching those cards? That's where you get to see a lot of these fighters, the new up and coming fighters. I agree. But even the marquee matchups have not been that good, in my opinion, to actually sit through the entire card. And I do sit through all the pay-per-view cards from start to finish. I mean, I'm talking from prelims all the way to end of the night. So, having said that, one thing that does stand out for MVP is that though they're not going head to head with the UFC directly in weekly competition, one thing I like about them, and I hope that this remains, is that they continue to put on maybe quarterly events once every 4 months, stack the deck, and hopefully make a killing that way, or potentially once a month. I don't think they need to go month to month. I don't know if they even have the revenue to go weekly in this scenario. I think going for larger events, more marquee, can slowly but surely put a dent uh, or make a dent in their numbers or in their favor. The TV streaming deals, of course, we know that's going to be tricky for PFL and MVP. I did some research, and right now, the PFL deal with ESPN ends in 2026. So they don't have a TV partner at the moment on the PFL side, and MVP currently has a partnership with Netflix. Now, the PFL and MVP merger, I don't know how that affects the relationship that MVP will have with Netflix. I don't think that'll be a big deal. There is no formal agreement in place between the PFL, or sorry, excuse me, between MVP and Netflix. But again, I would assume something might get done in that regard. If MVP can broker a deal or gain a deal with the streaming rights on Netflix, that'll be insane. One thing I also found, which is really interesting, is that one of their recent cards was on TikTok. So the other question is, are we going to see a lot more social media presence in terms of the actual streaming service? I mean, we've seen this with Jorge Masvidal's promotion, and also we've seen it with Bare Knuckle, right? They've been on YouTube and a few other non-conventional streaming services as well. I think Kick. I think what's the other streaming service that's out there that a lot of people are using? It eludes me. I'm sorry, guys. I'm 35. I'm getting older. Um, then looking at Netflix's subscriber count, according to web searches, it's 325 million for Netflix, and Paramount has about 77.5 million. Again, that's Netflix at 4x what Paramount's doing. So again, I think if Jake Paul and what's this gentleman's name, Nakisa, can get a deal done with Netflix, that'll be significant for them. And then again, the last thing, of course, the Jake Paul effect. I mean, 68.6 million combined followers across social media. I'm not a big fan of Jake Paul, but you gotta admire the fact that the kid's out there marketing. He's, 7 years younger than me. I'm not a big fan of his, but I gotta respect the hustle. I gotta respect the marketing aspect, and the guy's doing his thing. Now, I also started looking. I mean, have we seen anything like this before? Have we seen social media uh, influencers in this capacity before? No. And we've seen it. Probably the closest thing is Thriller. Again, going back to 2021, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the fact that we've seen something like this in the past, and it didn't sustain itself. It wasn't sustainable. Thriller really lost money, according to I keep forgetting his name, Nakisa. This has been making money. This promotion has been making money. So I'll take him at his word, and that they've produced a couple 100 million over the course of the last couple of years. So let's say that that's the case, and that they actually are in the black and not in the red. Good for them. So yeah, I mean, again, I think they'll make an impact. I think they rely on those quarterly or monthly events. I think they should stay away from weekly competition with the UFC, and I believe that they know that as well. A lot of movement happening right now in the MMA space from a business standpoint. We got to watch and see what Scott Coker does. And what do you guys think? Do you think MVP can actually compete with the likes of the UFC? Look, I don't think they'll be the UFC. I don't think they want to be the UFC. I think again, I sound like a broken record. 4 or 5 marquee events per year. You stack the deck, former fighters. You introduce maybe a couple of other celebrities. I don't want it to be one of those freak show events, but I think that there's something here, and I think people tune in. So if you guys have any feedback, please leave it, drop it down in the comment section. But thanks again for tuning in. This is Terry with Sunrise Sports. I'm out.